Imagine getting fired for saving someone's life. Now imagine walking home alone in a freezing downpour an hour later, and suddenly, 5 blacked-out supercars come screaming out of the dark and box you in. A door opens, a man steps out, and the first thing he growls is, "Where's the fat nurse?" You'd think it was the end, right? It was actually the beginning. Let me tell you exactly what happened. The emergency room at Riverside Metropolitan was a non-stop parade of human misery, but to Delia Frost, it was home. At 32, Delia, or Dee to the handful of people who bothered to see past her appearance, was the quiet backbone of the entire night shift. She was a heavy-set woman, carrying the weight of endless overnight shifts, chronic stress, and a genetic hand that dealt her curves and softness instead of the sharp angles the world seems to reward. Her scrubs were a size XXL. She was used to it all. The side eyes from the sleek young nursing grads, the condescending little smirks from the attending doctors. But whatever she lacked in a fashionable waistline, she more than made up for with a razor-sharp clinical mind and a pair of hands that almost never shook. It was 3:14 in the morning on a brutal Tuesday in November when the trauma bay doors slammed open. No paramedics. No heads up from dispatch. Just 2 men in soaked, obviously expensive overcoats, hauling a third one between them. The man in the middle was young, maybe 22, dark curls matted with blood and sweat, his custom white shirt drenched in a terrifying amount of crimson, bubbling up from a gunshot wound high on the right side of his chest. "Help him!" one of the men roared, his accent thick and sharp. "Do something!" Dr. Preston Vane, the attending on duty that night, took one look at these men, the visible bulges under their coats, the bullet wound, and went pale. He took a step backward. "Security!" he stammered toward the triage desk. "Get security! This is gang-related. We clear them out before we process anything." "He can't breathe!" Delia shouted, shoving right past him. She'd taken one look at the young man's blue-tinged lips and the veins bulging in his neck. His windpipe was shoving over to the left. His right lung was collapsing, trapping air inside his chest cavity, a tension pneumothorax. If he didn't get relief in the next 60 seconds, the pressure would stop his heart. "Frost, stand down," Vane snapped. "Protocol says we wait for police clearance on undispatched gunshot victims. They could be armed. They could be anybody. He's a kid, and he's dying right now." Delia didn't so much as glance at the 2 frightening men who'd carried him in. She only looked at the patient. She snatched a 14-gauge needle off the crash cart, her thick fingers moving with practiced, lightning speed. "You touch him, you're fired," Vane warned, his voice cracking. "I'm the attending." She ignored him completely. She found the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, on the young man's right side, and she drove the needle deep into his chest without a moment's hesitation. A loud, unmistakable hiss of escaping air cut through the tense silence of the trauma bay. Instantly, the young man gasped, his eyes flying open as oxygen rushed back into his good lung. That awful blue tint drained out of his lips. "Get him on oxygen. 2 large-bore IVs and Page surgery. Now!" Delia barked at a stunned junior nurse who finally snapped into motion. The 2 men who'd brought the boy in just stared at her. One of them, a man with a jagged scar running across his jaw, pointed a trembling, blood-smeared finger at her. "You saved him. What's your name?" "Nurse Frost," she said, breathless, wiping the sweat off her forehead. Before another word could be said, hospital security flooded the bay, followed close behind by 2 city police officers. And the 2 men. They simply melted back into the shadows of the waiting room and vanished out into the storm before the officers could even flip open a notepad. By 4 in the morning, the young man was stabilized up in the ICU. And by 4:15, Delia was summoned to the office of the chief hospital administrator, a woman named Vanessa Sloan. Now, Vanessa was a woman made entirely of sharp edges, designer suits, and corporate malice. She sat behind her enormous mahogany desk, Dr. Vane standing smugly at her side. "Nurse Frost," she began, not offering Delia a seat, "you flagrantly violated hospital protocol. You overrode a direct order from an attending physician, and you personally engaged with dangerous individuals who dragged an unregistered violent crime victim into our facility. I saved a life, Delia said, her voice shaking but her stance firm, her feet aching inside her worn nursing clogs. If I'd waited for protocol, that boy would be in the morgue. His heart was seconds from stopping. We're not some back alley clinic, Delia, Vanessa said coldly, her eyes dropping to Delia's waistline with a familiar, silent judgment. We're a prestigious institution. We have an image to protect. And frankly, you've never quite fit that image. We overlooked it because we were short-staffed. But today you became a liability. You're firing me? Delia whispered as the reality crashed down. I've been here 7 years. I've covered every missed shift, every holiday, and you'll be paid out for your accumulated leave. Vanessa cut in smoothly. Clear out your locker. Security will walk you off the premises. And honestly, the humiliation was worse than the firing itself, being watched by a smirking guard while she packed her stethoscopes, her favorite chipped coffee mug, and a half-eaten box of granola bars into a soggy cardboard box. The whispers from the younger nurses as she walked down the hall. And then, to top it all off, when she reached the employee garage, her beat-up old Honda refused to turn over. The alternator had finally given out. Defeated, exhausted, blinking back hot tears, Delia pulled her thin rain slicker tighter around her shoulders. She couldn't afford a cab. Not now, not tonight. She lived 2 miles away, near the old Italian district. She had no choice. She'd have to walk. The rain was merciless, driven sideways by a biting November wind that sliced right through her flimsy jacket. The streets were pitch black and completely deserted at 5 in the morning. Water pooled in the deep potholes, soaking straight through her shoes. With every step, that cardboard box got heavier in her arms, the soaked bottom sagging, threatening to drop out entirely. Tears mixed with the rain on her face. Her mind was racing through terrifying math. Rent was due in 3 days. Her savings were basically non-existent because she'd just paid out of pocket for her mother's expensive diabetes medication. She was 32, overweight, exhausted, and now unemployed, with a black mark on her record for insubordination. Just keep walking, she muttered to herself, her breath clouding in the freezing air as she turned onto an empty stretch of road. 1 foot in front of the other. She didn't hear them at first, over the roar of the rain. Then a low, guttural vibration of high-performance engines started rattling the pavement under her feet. Delia glanced over her shoulder. Headlights, blinding, perfectly aligned, cutting through the dark. And it wasn't one car, it was a convoy, a matte black Lamborghini SUV out front, flanked by 2 menacing blacked-out Mercedes G-Wagons. Behind them, a sleek Ferrari and an Audi. 5 multi-million-dollar supercars prowling down these rundown streets like predators on a hunt. Panic flared in her chest. This was exactly the kind of thing Dr. Vane had warned about. She dropped her head, hugged the soggy box tighter, and picked up her pace, edging toward the brick wall of an abandoned warehouse. The engines roared louder, and then the Lamborghini suddenly surged forward, swerved in front of her, and cut off the sidewalk. Delia gasped and stumbled backward. Before she could turn to run, the 2 G-Wagons pulled up alongside her, pinning her against the brick. The Ferrari and the Audi sealed off the street. She was trapped. Every door opened at once. 8 men stepped out into the pouring rain, and these weren't street thugs. Bespoke Italian suits, dark ties, long coats, and even in the dark, Delia could clearly make out the terrifying bulges of shoulder holsters underneath. Then the driver's door of the Lamborghini swung open, and a man stepped out. Tall, maybe 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to blot out the streetlights behind him. He carried an aura of absolute, chilling authority. Dark hair slicked back, sharp jaw dusted with faint stubble, and eyes, even in that dim light, of a piercing, dangerous steel grey. He looked like a man who built empires and buried anyone who got in his way. This was Adriano Marchetti, the head of the Marchetti organization, the most powerful and ruthless syndicate in the region. He took one slow step toward her, the rain seeming to bounce right off his heavy wool coat. His men stood dead still, a silent, deadly perimeter. Delia backed up until her shoulders hit the cold, wet brick. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This is it, she thought wildly. They're here to tie up loose ends. I saved someone from a rival crew, and now they're going to kill me. Adriano stopped 3 feet away. His cold eyes traveled over her. The soaked hair, the shivering, heavy-set frame, the pathetic cardboard box clutched to her chest. His jaw tightened. He turned his head slightly toward the man with the scarred jaw. The same man from the emergency room. Is this her? His voice was a low rumble that easily overpowered the storm. The scarred man nodded, deferential. Yes, boss. She wasn't at the desk, so we couldn't get her name off the board. But Dante told us what he saw before he passed out. Adriano turned that terrifying gaze back onto Delia. He took one more step. Where's the fat nurse? He demanded, hard and aggressive. Delia blinked, and the sheer audacity of the insult actually cut right through her terror. A spark of exhausted, furious indignation flared up in her chest. She had spent her whole life being belittled, overlooked, dismissed, and she'd been fired an hour ago for doing the right thing. She was done cowering. I'm right here, she snapped, her voice trembling but surprisingly loud. I'm the nurse, and I have a name. It's Delia. The armed men around them tensed, hands drifting toward their jackets at her tone. But Adriano raised a single gloved hand, and everyone froze. He just stared at her, his eyes searching her face, and slowly the hostility drained right out of his posture. And something completely different took its place, something that looked shockingly like reverence. Delia, he repeated, tasting the name. He looked down at the soggy box in her arms. Dante is my little brother. The people at the hospital, they told me what happened. They told me the doctor on duty ordered him left to die. And they told me a nurse broke every protocol, shoved a needle into his chest and gave him back to me. Delia swallowed hard, her anger faltering under his intense stare. I was just doing my job. No, Adriano said softly, stepping close enough that she could smell rain, leather, and expensive cologne. You did what nobody else in that room had the courage to do. You saved my blood. He gestured to the box. A stethoscope was dangling out of the side, dragging on the wet pavement. Why are you out here in the rain, Delia? He asked, his eyes narrowing. Why are your things in a box? Where's your car? My car died, she muttered, looking down, suddenly painfully aware of her ruined clothes and her size next to this magnificent, terrifying man. And I don't work there anymore. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. You don't work there anymore, he repeated, his voice dropping an octave, going lethal. They fired you. Delia nodded slowly. The administrator, Vanessa Sloan. She said I violated protocol and ruined the hospital's image by treating people like you. Adriano didn't yell. He didn't explode. But the sheer, contained violence radiating off him made Delia want to press herself back into the brick. He looked at his men. Bruno, he said quietly to the scarred man. Yes, boss. Buy Riverside Metropolitan, Adriano ordered, as casually as ordering a coffee. Fire the board, fire the doctor, and find this Vanessa Sloan. Delia's jaw dropped. Wait, you can't just... I can do whatever I want, Adriano said, turning back to her, his harsh features softening only for her. He reached out one large, warm hand and gently took the heavy, soaked box from her aching arms, passing it to a guard without even looking. You're shivering, he noted, and before she could protest, he unbuttoned his custom wool overcoat and draped it around her shoulders. It was enormous, swallowing her whole, still radiating his body heat. My brother is alive because of you, Delia, he said, looking directly into her eyes, seeing past the weight, past the soaked scrubs, straight to the core of her. That means my life and everything I own belongs to you, You will never walk in the rain again. You'll never worry about a bill again. He gestured to the open door of the Lamborghini. Get in. We're taking you home. The inside of that car smelled like pure, unapologetic wealth, bespoke leather, and the faint spice of his cologne. Delia sat frozen in the passenger seat, drowning in his coat. The rain hammered the tinted glass, but inside the cabin it was terrifyingly quiet. Behind them, the convoy fell into perfect formation, escorting them through the slick, empty streets. "Chestnut Street," she whispered, barely audible over the engine. "Near the old bakery, it's a brick walk-up." Adriano didn't even glance at the GPS. He just nodded, those big, scarred hands guiding the wheel with casual, terrifying grace. "My brother Dante. He's 22. He was supposed to be touring properties tonight. Instead, a rival crew ambushed him. 3 of my men died protecting him." Delia swallowed, staring at the sharp line of his profile. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said, low and lethal. "The men who did it are already dead. Bruno handled it while I drove to the hospital." She shivered, even though the car was warm. She was sitting beside a man who ordered executions as easily as she ordered lunch. And yet, when he pulled up to the curb of her crumbling apartment building, he didn't look at it with disgust. He looked at it with quiet calculation. "You live here," he stated, cutting the engine. "I know it's not a penthouse," she said defensively, insecurities flaring, pulling the coat tighter. "But it's what a nurse's salary gets you when you're paying $5,000 a month out of pocket for your mother's insulin and dialysis." Adriano turned his head slowly, his gray eyes locked onto hers, and for just a second the dangerous crime boss vanished, and what was left was a man deeply moved. "Your mother is sick." "Her name's Eleanor," Delia said, looking down at her hands. "She's all I have. I was working doubles to keep her treatments going, and without my job, without my license—" Her voice cracked, and before she could stop them, hot tears spilled over. She was 32, overweight, exhausted, and completely broken. He moved so fast she flinched, but his touch was remarkably gentle. He reached across the console, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. His hand lingered, fingers tracing the soft curve of her jaw. "Look at me, Delia," he said softly. She forced her eyes up to his. "The world tells women that to be worth something, they have to be thin and quiet and invisible," he said, his voice vibrating with a dark, simmering intensity. "I don't care what the world says. I look at you, and I see a woman with hands steady enough to cheat death, soft enough to comfort the dying, and fierce enough to look a man like me in the eye and tell him she has a name. You are magnificent." Delia's breath hitched. No man, let alone one who looked like he'd stepped off a magazine cover, had ever spoken to her like that. He wasn't looking past her size. He was looking right at it, and he was captivated. A sharp knock on the driver's window broke the spell. It was Bruno. Adriano rolled it down a crack. "Talk." "Boss," Bruno said, water dripping from his scarred chin. "The buyout's in motion. We set up a shell company, Meridian Health Partners. We're aggressively buying up the board's majority shares. By 8 tomorrow morning, you own Riverside Metropolitan." "And the administrator?" Adriano asked, his eyes never leaving Delia's face. "Vanessa Sloane's asleep in her condo down by the lake. She has no idea." "Good." He rolled the window back up and turned fully to Delia. "Go upstairs. Pack a bag for you and one for your mother. You're not living in this building anymore. Mr. Marchetti, I can't—" "Adriano," he corrected smoothly. "And you can. I'm moving you and your mother into my estate. My private medical staff will take over her dialysis. You will never pay for another vial of insulin as long as you live." "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I just saved a patient. It's what I took an oath to do. And I took an oath to protect my family," he replied, leaning in until his lips were inches from hers. "You're the reason my brother is breathing. That makes you family now, and my people take care of their own." 2 days later, The boardroom of Riverside Metropolitan was a suffocating chamber of pure panic. Vanessa Sloane, impeccable as always in a stark white suit, paced at the head of the long table. Dr. Preston Vane sat nearby, mopping sweat off his forehead. The sudden hostile takeover by Meridian Health Partners had blindsided the entire board. They'd been called in for an emergency meeting with the new majority shareholder, and nobody knew who it was. "We just need to explain our margins," Vanessa said, her voice tight. "We tell them about the cost-cutting, the recent terminations to balance the budget." The heavy oak doors swung open, and silence dropped over the room like a guillotine. 4 men in tailored black suits walked in first, fanning out to secure the corners. Bruno, scarred and stoic, took a spot by the door. And then Adriano Marchetti entered, in a charcoal 3-piece suit that practically screamed lethal elegance. But it wasn't the notorious crime boss that made Vanessa gasp and drop her pen. It was the woman on his arm. Delia Frost walked into that boardroom completely transformed. Gone were the shapeless, stained scrubs. She wore a custom-tailored, deep emerald wrap dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, full at the bust, cinched at the waist. Her hair fell in soft waves. Her makeup was flawless. She looked powerful, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying. "Delia!" Dr. Vane choked out, his face going ash-grey. What is this?" Adriano pulled out the leather chair at the head of the table. He didn't sit in it. He guided Delia into it, then stood behind her like a dark, immovable guardian. "Good morning, Vanessa." "Richard," Delia said, her voice steady and smooth, folding her hands on the polished wood. "I believe we have some hospital business to discuss." Vanessa's manicured hands shook as she gripped the table edge. She looked from Delia to Adriano, finally recognizing the terrifying man from the ER whispers. You can't be Meridian Health. You're a criminal." "I'm an investor," Adriano corrected coldly. "And as of 48 hours ago, I own 82% of this hospital's voting shares. Which means I own this building, I own the equipment, and I own your contracts." He leaned forward, planting his big hands on the back of Delia's chair. 2 days ago, you fired the finest medical professional in this facility. You put your pathetic public image ahead of a human life. You insulted her. You stripped her of her dignity. "She broke protocol," Dr. Vane shouted defensively. "She operated outside her scope." Adriano didn't even look at him. He just snapped his fingers. Bruno stepped forward and tossed a thick folder onto the table. It slid to a stop right in front of Vanessa. "My associates did a little digging into your prestigious image," Adriano said smoothly. "That folder contains bank records tracing $2.4 million diverted from the Children's Cancer Fund into a private offshore account under your maiden name. And Dr. Vane, it details the kickbacks you've been taking from pharma reps to push addictive opioids through this ER." Vanessa's face drained of every drop of color. She collapsed into her chair, realizing she was completely, utterly finished. "You're going to kill us," Dr. Vane whimpered, trembling. "I'm a businessman, Richard, not a monster," Adriano sneered. "I don't need to kill you." And right on cue, the boardroom doors opened again. 2 city detectives walked in, looking distinctly uncomfortable, but determined. Adriano had handed them the financial evidence on a silver platter. It was a career-making bust they couldn't ignore, no matter where it came from. "Vanessa Sloane, Richard Vane," the lead detective said, pulling out his cuffs. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and medical malpractice." Delia sat perfectly still and watched the 2 people who had made her life a living hell get read their rights and marched out in handcuffs. The overwhelming, complete satisfaction of that moment left her breathless, and when the doors closed, leaving only Delia, Adriano, and his men, he looked down at her. "This hospital needs a new chief administrator," he said softly. "Someone who actually cares about patients. Someone who knows what it's like to work the floor." "I was thinking of appointing a woman named Delia Frost." She looked up at him, heart hammering. "Adriano, I'm just a nurse. I don't know how to run a hospital. You know how to save lives, he corrected, coming around the chair and kneeling beside her, not caring one bit about his expensive suit. He took her hands in his. I'll hire the accountants. I'll hire the lawyers. You run the medicine. You build the hospital you always wished you could work in. This is madness, she whispered, tears of joy welling up. Why are you doing all of this for me? Look at me. I'm not some mafia queen. I'm just a heavy girl from the old neighborhood. Stop, Adriano ordered, his voice thick with raw emotion. He reached up and cupped her face. You are exactly what I want. Your curves, your softness, your fire. You are the most beautiful thing I have ever laid eyes on. I don't want a fragile little porcelain doll. I want a queen who can hold a man's heart in her hands and keep it beating. And he didn't wait for her to argue. He pulled her down by the lapels of her dress and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was consuming, raw power, dark promises, and an undeniable, burning passion. Delia melted into him, her hands tangling in his dark hair, finally letting go of a lifetime of insecurities that had weighed her down. She wasn't a discarded employee anymore. She was the savior of the Marchetti family, the new head of Riverside Metropolitan, and the sole obsession of the most dangerous man in the city. As he pulled back and rested his forehead against hers, Adriano smiled, a rare, devastating thing. Come here, he murmured, helping her to her feet. Your mother's waiting for us at the estate, and we have an empire to run. So there you have it. Delia went from a humiliated, discarded nurse walking home in the freezing rain to the most powerful woman in the city's entire medical world. And all because she had the courage to do the right thing when it counted, when everyone else was too scared to act. And Adriano? He proved something a lot of people forget, that a real man doesn't care about a number on a scale. He cares about the size of a woman's heart and the strength of her spine. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Delia made the right call, stepping into that dangerous world with her mafia king? Or would you have run the other way? Drop your answer in the comments, because I read every single one. If this story gave you chills or made you cheer, do me a favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps more than you know. Share it with someone who loves a good badass revenge story. And if you want more thrilling drama like this, subscribe and tap that bell so you never miss the next one. I'll see you there.